But one of the things that I brought up last week was talking about how I don't like Strongman Pro cards, right? The Strongman Pro is kind of a waste. And I got a little bit, I don't know, I look back on it, right? Because I watch my shows a couple times and I'm cutting clips out of them. I might have been a little harsh on as a critic of it when it came to these organizations like Ragnar or like the World's Strongest Games or World Strength Games and USS and Strongman Corp and you know and I probably was probably a little bit rough on the edges when I made those comments, but it's no knock on the effort of that. And I want to make that clear because I had a lot of comments from you guys coming in. It's no knock on the effort of these organizations giving pro cards out. I understand that value, right? I understand what they're trying to do. Whether it's thought through, I get it, right? It's a part of a sport. Growing a sport, you have to identify, I guess that top tier of athlete, right? Somehow you have to recognize them. Some type of recognition is involved there. And a lot of times it's through status, right? Status is what gets you there. You're the national champion, or you're the OSG champ, or you're a pro card, or you're a pro card holder, or you want a pro show, or you want a big show, right? It's a lot of that kind of stuff. And don't get me wrong, I get that. A lot of you guys and gals out there don't necessarily think that that's necessary, and I respect that because you're right. As an athlete, we don't give a shit. We just want to compete and win. But there are a lot of you out there that deserve that recognition. There are a lot of you out of there that want some of that recognition. There's nothing wrong with that either. I certainly would want to be recognized as one of the best in my class if I was competing, and I think we all have that right. I just don't think the pro card is the right route to take because I just think it's just too. Well, it's too messy. You're not going to correct this anymore with these other organizations involved and how and where and what and all that stuff. I went over that last week. However, after talking to a lot of you last week, throughout the week since I released that show, something really kind of came to my mind, and it was a thought that we do, however, need something to recognize status. And because status in strongman is so fleeting, right? And what I mean by that is you can be a pro NFL player, a pro baseball player, a pro hockey player, let's say, in the other side of sports. And generally, you're going to be that pro for a significant amount of time. You're going to be that guy or that gal that competes in pro sports that is head and shoulders. You've put the work in, you put the time in. You're better at that sport than 99.9% of the people out there in that particular sport. And you're a pro, and you could be a pro for a lifetime, right? 20 years in the NBA. You could be a 15-year vet in the NFL or play baseball for 20 years. You're a pro. And at any point, nobody would contest the fact that you're that good to be there. And strongman, it's a bit different. Our window of opportunity here is roughly, what was the average thing? I went over this with a couple guys in the years past. I think Skip was one of them. I think it's about 3 years now. The average length of a strongman competitor in our sport is about 3 years. Isn't that crazy? For some of us that have been around forever, of course, I've taken many hiatuses, as many of you have, because of injury in life. But the average competitive lifetime of a strong man or strong woman is 3 years. So to think about being a pro by itself is a very difficult achievement because once you gain that status, it doesn't mean that you're better than 99.9% of the rest of the sport like it does in other sports. It just simply means at that moment, during that training block or the time that you put in to get you to that point, to have an opportunity to win that show or to win that pro card, you were able to do it. But now there's more work to be done. You have to go back and retool and fight injuries off and hope you can have some longevity in the sport and continue to win at that high level. And there are some guys out there that have done that. You hear me talk about them all the time. Guys like Tyler Davis and Tyler Young, for instance, the last two guys I spoke about on the show. Yeah, they're pros, and it would be difficult to knock them off that perch. But for many of them, including themselves at certain times, you can have a bad show. You can have bad 2 or 3 shows. Hell, you can have a bad year and kind of be forgotten about being that pro, right? But there's still status involved, or there's still the opportunity for status involved, but it doesn't resonate with people anymore. That's what I'm getting. The pro card, it doesn't resonate. So my thought was this. Bear with me, guys. I'm coming along here. Bear with me. Let me take a drink of water. My thought was this. I talked about ecosystem in sport just a minute ago. I talked about how important it is that we all have a lane that we're in when we represent this community. Whether you're multifunctional or not. I also compete, but I do a podcast. Darren competes. Well, Highland Games more of these, and I can't wait to do that with you, Darren. By the way, Highland Games and of course Strongman and podcasting. Yanni does some strength stuff, Strongman podcast and announcing. I mean, we all are kind of multifaceted. So, but we're all a part of this ecosystem. We all have the kind of this lane we're in, right? And for now, I'm in this sort of media lane. What really is great about other sports that don't provide a pro status, or even if they do, they always provide status. What I mean is we could go into ESPN at any point and there's a ranking of the best NFL teams going into the season and, the top 32 from 1 to 32. You could do that with the NBA and you could do that with hockey. In college football and in basketball in particular, well, all college sports, but we know this the best, college sports have a ranking system. They rank their college Division I and Division II football teams from 1st to 10 or 1 through 25, right? Or whatever, top 10 and top 25. That's how we identify status with these teams. Because not any one of us as a consumer, not many of us, I'm sure there's one or two of you guys out there, know that much about all these fucking teams. We don't. We just don't. I know about Michigan. I know about Michigan State. I know about Ohio State. I know about teams in the Big Ten. I don't know a lot about the SEC. I don't know a lot about the ACC and the Big Nine or all these other divisions. Of course, they're all changing names now. I don't know enough about them to really know about them, but I know they exist. What's helpful to me as a spectator, as a consumer, is I'm able to look at those rankings sometimes to educate myself on what I should anticipate, who is the best, right? Or who they're these AP poll, this AP poll, which is made up of media largely, essentially, and then you have the coaches poll. They put them together for a total ranking or one or the other. It doesn't matter. They're generally the same anyhow. But what that gives me as a consumer is it gives me an opportunity to look at other teams and go, oh, this is what I should anticipate. This is what I should expect. They're obviously being ranked because they're very good in these other expert eyes. They're very good at it. This AP poll of all these media types, ranks these teams, and I'm gonna listen to that. I'm gonna listen if University of Washington is ranked in the top 10, whether I've ever seen them play or not, and anticipate that game between Washington and Michigan because they're ranked very highly. So you guys see where I'm going with this, right? I think that our sport needs something like that. See, that would be a very relevant thing to do. I get it, very subjective. I would say objectively subjective. I think there are those of us in the sport that know the sport well enough and all the divisions of the sport well enough to truly give you a top 25 and that top 5 or 6 being arguably right there, right? I mean, because we could say that in the peripheral of college basketball and college football in particular, that, yeah, you can always argue that last 10, that 15 through 25. You can always argue that if that extended to 35, there's probably 10 other teams that could easily jump in. But that's where the conversation starts. That's where the excitement about the sport starts. That's where loyalty comes in. That's where pride comes in. That's where there's that status comes in, right? Because whether the 25th team in the country is really the 25th team in the country or not, we're looking at that. And if I'm from that community, I'm proud as fuck about it, and I'm cheering them on because I want them to prove to everybody else they're good enough to be there. And then that 26th team saying, wait a second, we're right here. And we're going to beat teams you should be beating, or we're going to beat you to jump you to get to where I need to be to get to number one. That's what makes great fodder in sport. We can cheer teams on like we can cheer people on. And it does then require these teams to what? Play better teams. You can't play the 3, pansy-ass teams in the beginning of the season anymore in college football. For those of you that don't know about that, they used to set up 3 like gimmies, right? The first 3 games of the season were, Michigan versus fucking like Christian Academy Southwest or something. Like nobody's ever heard of them, and Michigan rolls over them fucking 90-0. That doesn't work anymore. These teams now have to schedule better opponents to be taken seriously. So what this does as well, if people truly want status out there, they have to compete at better shows. They have to go after better shows to compete with better competition to be ranked higher. Listen, you can win every show you want locally. Let's just give you an example. If you're the best 105 guy in the country, you think you are, and you win all your shows locally, but you never step outside of that, it's going to be difficult for anybody to recognize how good you really are unless you go up against the competition necessary to prove that point. So now we're going to get more people out of the woodwork that will want to be ranked with these classes. You know, it's like no different to say just because you win OSG doesn't make you number one in the world. No, you just won OSG, which is a very high mark for being ranked very high on that list if we had rankings for sure, without a doubt. But if OSG is the only show you do and you win it, well, chances are you're not going to be ranked in the top 5 or maybe top 5 or top 6 as a competitor. Because you won that show, but you're not getting any higher than that because you're not proving your salt against other competitors and other competitions with other apparatus and other weights. I mean, if you're a guy like, I'll bring him up again because, he's my favorite guy. That's why I wore my hat. One of my favorite guys and good friend of mine, Tyler Davis, takes on all competition. Tyler Davis wants the competition. So Tyler Davis, by default, even though he would be my number one right now in the United States in the U90 class, he deserves to fucking be there because he takes on all challengers and he goes after people in competitions, not only in here, but overseas. And whether or not he wins every show, but if he's taking second, third, and fourth place in all the great shows around the world, you could argue that guy probably should be ranked in the top 3, if not number 1. I mean, this is all the kind of criteria involved in this that, of course, would make it subjective. I get that, but very objectively subjective. We have point to back it up. I'll give you another example. Good friend of mine, CJ Pierce. CJ done a lot of pro picks with me. I love CJ. You guys know this. CJ is not doing the U90 Classic this year. He can. He's got other stuff going on. That's fine. But right now, CJ's competing in a fuck ton of local shows because he's a guy that loves the sport of strongman. And he champions the sport on. He represents locally as much as he possibly can. Listen, I know that CJ is probably the second best U90 guy on the planet right now. And I say that out of respect for Tyler Davis. However, if I was ranking strongmen today, I couldn't in good conscience, even though I know he may be that guy, I couldn't rank him in that top 5. I just couldn't because I'd have to see what CJ's capable of competing, who he's capable of beating now and where he's competing at. That has to come into play, just like these college football teams and college basketball teams. If they're not face-to-face with the competition they're equal to, then they can't be ranked very high. Listen, you can be an undefeated football team in Division I, but if you don't play anybody, you're not even going to make the playoffs. You may not even be ranked in the top 10. So that's what I'm getting at. There's this awesome sort of curiosity about it that I think we all could appreciate, that where these rankings would be. And I get it. Some of you might be pissed off sometime. Some of you may not. But it's that pride thing and that loyalty thing and that I guess you could say that opportunity to prove yourself, because I think that's what our sport needs. It doesn't need a pro card, because listen, a pro card's no good from year to year anyhow, as far as I'm concerned. There's too much talent and there's too much competition and there's too many variables to say just because you're a pro that you're capable of beating even most of the amateurs on any given Saturday anymore, as many of you know. So I think, maybe I'm wrong. I'd like to hear you guys' feedback about this. I think we should get a collective of people. And listen, I would volunteer for this, obviously, guys. I know enough about all your classes that I could probably lend to it a bit. I'm not the expert. I wouldn't do it by myself. Wouldn't even attempt it. However, I think if there were certain criteria laid out, to individuals who are asked to partake in this immediately, Darren and John and Yanni would be 4 guys right off the top of my head that I wouldn't even hesitate to say we need to start this and bring this group of minds on, because these guys are all inundated within the community and understand all these athletes in every class, who they're competing with regionally and other, because we're all from different parts of the United States. We can lend our argument to all the people that we think would be deserved in our top 10, for instance. And I think that's where you'd have to kind of draw the line in the United States, right? Top 10 in every class, I think, would be fair. Now, of course, what is the end game, right? Well, in the beginning, there is really no end game. I mean, we would just create these rankings, and hopefully these competitors then would try to find one another, right, to move up the rankings. Maybe we can get sponsors involved in these rankings at some point, and maybe there's some type of reward for rankings at the end of a season if we can find 2 calendar dates that make sense. I mean, so this is an opportunity to grow the sport. Where the rankings would go and how the rankings would take and sort of take off to or end up, I mean, that's kind of the fun part about it too. Who knows? Maybe there's a really good promoter out there that would say, we're going to have our championships at the end of the year, and people that are in the top 10 in all these classes or top, whatever. You want to take 8 athletes, take 8, whatever you want to do, and say, we're going to cover the cost of everything for you guys to come and compete for this national championship, let's say. Now, I get it. Don't steal all my ideas out there, guys. I'm going to coin some of this right now. At least get me involved in it. But there's an idea for somebody out there. There's an idea to have some fun with this, to make it resonate amongst our athletes, to say it means something to them. Not only from a status standpoint, so our spectators, our fans of the sport, can look at this rankings that comes out once every month, maybe once every 2 weeks, and gives people an opportunity to have conversation about our athletes and our sport. And it also gives our athletes an opportunity to prove themselves for status. Because I know we appreciate that as athletes. We want to be known for being good in our sport. We work hard to get here. We put a lot of fucking time in. And that being recognized is important to us. And I know there's a lot of humble guys and gals out there that say, I don't know about that. I call it bullshit on you. I think we all want to be recognized to some degree. And I think this would be a good way to do it. Now, this is an idea I had literally 2 days ago. Literally coming up with it. I was in church, to be honest with you. Whatever he's saying, it didn't resonate with me. I didn't even want to listen to him, so I was thinking about this shit. That tells you how fucked up I am, honest to God. All right, so anyhow, this is what I'm talking about. So I'm going to give you guys a chance to stew over this and let me know your thoughts. I get it. It's going to be across the board, but I still think it would be good for our sport. And I think there's a lot of teeth with this when it comes to growing our sport with some legitimacy to status, ranking, and kind of giving not only us strong men and strong women an opportunity to kind of see who the competition is, but it's going to give our fan base out there, our spectators, to get really involved with you guys individually who make this top 10, who make this list every year. And who knows, we can look at this list objectively 4 or 5 years down the road, and we can say, well, look at Evan Singleton, hypothetically, right? Could have been number 1 2 years in a row, and all of a sudden he's a pro. And then we start looking back and going, oh, this guy's a pro now. And this guy's, I'm talking that big pro status guys, the world's strongest man type stuff. And wherever this sport goes from here for other classes as well. But certainly with those guys, you could argue the Trey Mitchells of the world, the Bobby Thompsons, the Evan Singletons, probably all would have had this status, right? It's almost like saying, it's no surprise that the University of Alabama drafts the most NFL football players because they're constantly number 1. Fucking right. So we can start objectively looking at the stats of this and saying, is this working or not working over the next few years, and tweak it so we can get it kind of dialed in, so we can legitimately look at a ranking and go, yeah, that's pretty close. We can argue it one way or the other few spots. But ultimately, when we see people in competition that are competing against one another between 1 and 10, we're expecting a good show. We're expecting these guys to go head-to-head. And not only are we, they're also anticipating as well, because there's a fight to be had, and that'll be a hell of a lot of fun to watch, talk about before and after that competition. So just something to think about. Years ago, Strongman Corp used to have this, actually. They were Strongman Corp, just for a brief time, I think. And it wasn't Strongman, it was NAS back then, you guys, North American Strongman. They had a ranking system, and it was a little bit more archaic, of course, to no fault of anybody's. But they basically took platinum shows and pro-am shows to determine the best heavyweight open amateurs in the United States at any given time. You had to compete, like I said, and you had to perform, and then these stats kind of, however they were put together, would determine who this top 5, top 10 was, that kind of thing. And, it was kind of cool. I found my name on that list once. I think I was 4th in the United States as an open heavyweight. And again, that didn't mean a whole lot back then because it wasn't that big of a sport, essentially. It wasn't recognized by a lot of fans. It certainly wasn't being live streamed, so you didn't have a lot of spectators outside of those within our own community. But it was a cool thing. I mean, I was proud of that, as I know a lot of athletes would be proud of something like that, because status means something. I mean, at the very most, it's a pat on the back that says, hey, you're working your fucking ass off, and you deserve to be mentioned in this list. And I think we can pull it off.